My comrades, good evening to all of you. Thank you, comrades from BDS, for the invitation. Comrade Soli, Comrade Reneva from the SACP, thank you for your presence. I have prepared a very long speech, but it's such a short message that I will deliver to you. First of all, I want to reiterate our thanks, our sincere thanks, on behalf of our embassy for the invitation from the organizers. And on my way here, before I prepared this long speech, I was thinking what would be the message that I should convey in this very important occasion. And the first thing I want to say, just to cut my long speech short and give you a short version, is that Cuba fully stands behind the cause of the Palestinian people. I remember in my years when I was a young diplomat, when I was posted at the UN, that Cuba was one of the leading countries in the defense of the Palestinian cause for many, many years. At that time, Cuba was one of the deputy chairs of the commission at the UN, or the committee at the UN, that dealt with the Palestinian issue. And we played a very important, pivotal role in promoting the defense of the Palestinian cause. Of course, we strongly, my government strongly condemned the decision by the United States government to move the embassy, their embassy, to East Jerusalem. And it's a major provocation and a major violation of international law and of the relevant resolutions of the UN, as my colleague from the Palestinian embassy said. So first, I want to reiterate on behalf of the Cuban people and government our commitment to continue to defend and uphold the Palestinian cause. So this is the one thing I want to make clear in this brief presentation. Secondly, it will be very important for me to express also our sincere thanks to the South African people for their everlasting solidarity with the Cuban Revolution as well, not only with the Palestinian people, but also with the Cuban Revolution. And I want in particular thank the support of the South African people in our fight against the blockade. The blockade that the United States government has imposed on Cuba is, I should say without any shadow of a doubt, the longest running blockade ever in the history of mankind. It is over 60 years now that the United States imposed a very stringent set of economic, political measures to try to do away, to cause the collapse of the Cuban Revolution, something that they will never achieve by means of pressure, economic pressure, and so on. But once again, I want to call on the constant solidarity of the international community, in particular of South Africans, to once and for all do away with this unjust policy by the United States that causes enormous suffering to the people of Cuba. I could be here standing, rattling off thousands of examples that illustrate the perverse nature of the blockade, but I will not do that tonight in order to give the opportunity to all the colleagues to also address you. But just to give you a brief an illustration of the impact of the blockade, only last year the quantified damages of the blockade was $4 billion. You can imagine for a country as little as Cuba what $4 billion signifies. How many more schools we could have built with that kind of money? How many more hospitals we could have built with that kind of money? According to some estimates, in order for Cuba to overcome the economic crisis in which we are in, we would require close to between $2 and $2.5 billion in foreign direct investment. But the blockade only last year cost us $4 billion in terms of quantifiable damages. Of course, we say quantifiable because we cannot quantify the suffering of a Cuban mother when she has a child that is affected by cancer and the drug is US manufactured, and for the simple reason that this boy is a Cuban, this mother cannot have access to this drug that can save the life of this young Cuban boy. The suffering cannot be quantified, but nevertheless, the quantifiable nature of the blockade was estimated last year at $4 billion. Also, but despite this tremendous impact of the blockade against Cuba, that has not stopped our country from preserving the gains of the revolution. And despite the blockade and the cost and the pain that causes to our society, we have been able, and we are proud to say that we have been able to maintain throughout these 60 years, from 1959, free access to quality health care and to quality education. Despite the blockade and the $130 billion it has cost in these last 60 years, we have been able to reduce the infant mortality rate by 4 per 1,000 children born alive. An social indicator that is on par or is even better than the one that the US can show. And that is a testament of the political commitment of the Cuban Revolution and that of the political will of our government that the people should always come first. And the blockade has not either stopped Cuba from contributing, sharing the little we have with other countries of the world, in particular with Africa. A moment ago, a colleague, the program director, was mentioning the Quito Carnival. It's true, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Quito Carnival that changed the course of Southern Africa's history. Because as a result of this battle and its outcome, it achieved the independence of Namibia and it accelerated the downfall of the apartheid regime. I'm sure Solly, when he speaks, will refer to this matter because he knows the history of Cuba very well, much better than I do. As a matter of fact, speaking of Quito Carnival, we have our Trade and Economic Counselor from the embassy, and he was at the battle in Quito Carnival. He's a living testimony of so perhaps he could. I was too young for that, but he was there. He fought. He was willing, when he was a very young man, he was willing to leave the family behind out of a sense of internationalism and come all the way from that tiny island all the way to Africa, and was willing to give his life in order to assist in the liberation of this continent. More than 300,000 Cuban soldiers fought in Africa, and many of them were Cubans who were descendants of the 1.2 million Africans who were forced to Cuba to work as slaves. So we see our contribution in Africa as part of our debt to this continent where we come from. Well, at least half of Cuba half of our nationality is from African descent. The other half is from Spanish descent. In my case, as you can see, more than half of my being is African. So I'm very proud to be here. We don't boast. We don't speak about our tour of duty in Africa as a matter of boasting, but we see it as a testament of the willingness of a whole people in Cuba that was ready to come and sacrifice and lay down their lives in this continent to assist in their liberation. Finally, I want to again thank the organizers, BDS, the South African Communist Party, for their presence. I want to say special thanks to my comrades from Angola and Sao Tome who are also here with us, from MPLA, who are comrades in arms, back in those days in Africa in the 70s and 80s. And you can rest assured, once again, before I conclude, that Cuba will always stand side by side with the peoples of Africa. And we view this opportunity, this kind of activities of solidarity, as a very important weapon of revolutionaries. Because we revolutionaries, we don't have a single nuclear weapon or missile or any of those things. Our most powerful weapons are, one, the truth, and that we are on the right side of history. And another very important weapon we have is solidarity amongst all of us. And that's why it's very important for us to practice, to exercise solidarity in concrete terms, with concrete actions. And that is why we fully support, and we did not hesitate when we were invited to attend this activity to express our solidarity with the cause of Palestine. But there are many other causes around the world that require our active solidarity. It's not solidarity in declarations, which are important, but we have to go beyond that. We need to practice active solidarity, concrete solidarity. And that was showed, by the way, when the Cuban 5 were released from US prisons. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but solidarity in that instance proved that it was a very potent weapon in our hands. President Obama at that time did not release the Cuban 5 after unjust imprisonment, because suddenly President Obama became a good fellow, and he understood the injustice that his government had committed. But he was forced to release the Cuban 5 because the wave of solidarity that was created around the world, and in South Africa in particular, was too much for him to bear. Solidarity that took the shape of different forms. Events in legal events, the role of lawyers, the role of trade unions in South Africa, the role of the Communist Party leading this campaign, and many in the United States, the solidarity that this cause was able to garner. That's why I say that we believe that solidarity is very important, and we have to keep all these efforts in solidarity not only with Cuba and Palestine, but with other revolutionary causes in the world, including Venezuela, a country that is under the target of the US imperialism now, and that also requires solidarity from us. With this, I will stop. The program director is looking at me like I should stop now. Thank you once again for the solidarity, and please accompany us in this very hard and difficult road in getting the blockade finally lifted. More importantly, now where we have a new administration in the US that is bent on reversing everything, the little gains that we did under Obama. So your solidarity is more important for the Cuban people now. Thank you very much.